Did people in the Middle Ages even like animals? We picture a world of mud, plague, and hardship. A time when life was cheap, for humans and animals alike. We think of dogs as tools for the hunt. We think of cats as mere mousers. We assume the bond we have with our pets is a modern invention, a luxury of a comfortable age. But is that true? What if the need to care for a creature, to feel its warmth and loyalty, is more fundamental than we think? What if, buried in old manuscripts and household accounts, there are clues to a much deeper story? It's a story of affection, concern, and incredible love that spans 1,000 years. A story that shows us they were not so different from us after all. They just had different ways of showing it. Number 22, did a name make it more than just an animal? Giving something a name is the first step toward loving it. It separates one individual from the teeming mass. A dog is a category. But Sturdy is a friend. People in the Middle Ages understood this perfectly. They gave their animals names. These were not just functional labels. They were names filled with personality, hope, and sometimes humor. We know this from records that have survived. The household accounts of King Edward II of England, who reigned from 1307 to 1327, list payments for the care of his dogs. And these dogs had names. Names like Sturdy, Hardy, and Beau. These are simple, strong names. They suggest a close, personal knowledge of each dog's character. It was not just royalty. A 15th century English priest, Richard Methley, wrote about his beloved cat, Mita. He didn't just call her cat. He gave her a name, a unique identity. In the famous 14th century hunting treatise, Livre de la Chasse, Book of the Hunt, Gaston III, Count of Foix, known as Gaston Phoebus, lists names he considers suitable for hunting hounds. He suggests names like Beaumont, Clements, Grisette, and Ami. These are not just sounds to shout in a forest. They're elegant, thoughtful names. They sound like the names of companions, not tools. The act of naming changes our perception. The work of cognitive scientists like Lara Boroditsky shows how language shapes our reality. When we assign a specific noun, a proper name, to an animal, our brain recategorizes it. It moves from the column labeled asset or thing to the one labeled individual or being. This is not a modern psychological quirk. It is a fundamental human process. By naming his dogs, a medieval hunter was not just making it easier to call them back. He was acknowledging their unique spirit. He was forming a bond. The name was the first thread in a tapestry of affection. It was a declaration that this creature mattered. What we still do not know is perhaps more haunting. How many millions of pet names are lost to history, whispered in homes and fields but never written down? Did the sound of a specific name trigger a different, more complex neurological response in a medieval dog than a generic command? And when a pet died, was it the loss of the animal itself or the silence where its name used to be that caused the most pain? Number 21. Was your table scrap their delicacy? They say you are what you eat. They also say sharing food is a fundamental act of love. In the medieval world, this was no different. We might imagine medieval pets scrounging for scraps in the dirt, but the reality was often much more intimate. Many pets, especially those belonging to the wealthy, ate what their owners ate. They shared the same bread, the same meat, the same hearth. This was not just about convenience. It was about inclusion. To share your food with an animal was to welcome it into the family circle. Household accounts from castles and manors often detail specific food purchases for the animals. The accounts for Dame Alice de Brienne from 1418 to 1419 in Suffolk, England, show bread being baked specifically for the dogs. This was not leftover crusts. This was a planned, budgeted part of the household's food production. They were feeding their dogs a staple of the human diet. Similarly, hunting dogs, the elite athletes of their day, were given carefully considered diets. Gaston Phoebus, in his Livre de la Chasse, recommended a specific mash of bran and bread, sometimes enriched with meat, to keep his hounds in peak condition. He was essentially prescribing a medieval version of performance dog food. This practice tells us something important about their view of animals. They were not seen as biologically alien creatures with entirely different needs. They were seen as part of the domestic sphere. A 14th century manuscript, Le Ménagier de Paris, The Goodman of Paris, an instruction book written by an elderly man for his young wife, includes advice on how to care for the household's dogs. He advises feeding them well to ensure their loyalty and affection. The connection between food and love was explicit. Feeding was not just sustenance, it was emotional maintenance. It was a daily ritual of care that reinforced the bond between human and animal. It made the animal dependent, yes, but it also made the human a provider, a protector, a figure of love. But what mysteries does this shared diet hide? Did sharing human food rich in salts, fats, and processed grains lead to a host of pet health problems we wrongly assume are modern, like dental decay or kidney issues? By bringing pets into our food chain, did we inadvertently transfer microbes and parasites that altered their long-term evolution? And could the very taste of human food have made them less wild, rewiring their brains for domestication in a way that had nothing to do with training? Number 20. Did a warm bed mean a warm heart? A place to sleep is a place of vulnerability. Where we choose to rest says a lot about who we trust. For medieval pets, a spot by the fire or a bed of fresh straw was more than just shelter. It was a profound statement of belonging. In a world without central heating, warmth was a precious commodity. Sharing it was an act of generosity and care. The image of a dog curled at the foot of a bed or a cat nestled by a crackling hearth is a powerful one, and it is a scene that was common in the Middle Ages. Gaston Phoebus was obsessive about the comfort of his hounds. In Livre de la Chasse, he dedicates significant attention to their living quarters. He insisted that the kennel should be built of wood, raised off the damp ground, and have a sunny yard for the dogs to play in. He demanded that their bedding of straw be changed frequently to keep it clean and dry. He even specified that in the morning, the kennel door should be open to the south so the dogs could enjoy the warmth of the sun. This is not the advice of a man who saw his dogs as mere equipment. This is the careful planning of someone who deeply cared for their well-being and comfort. It was not just for the elite hunting hounds. In many ordinary homes, the family dog or cat would have found a place to sleep inside, near the central fire. This was partly practical. An animal's body heat could be a welcome addition on a cold night. But it was also about companionship. The quiet breathing of a sleeping animal nearby was a comfort. We see this intimacy depicted in medieval art. Illuminated manuscripts often show dogs resting on the long robes of their mistresses or sleeping on cushions in private chambers. These are not working animals. They are companions, sharing the most private and peaceful moments of domestic life. The 12th century Ancrine Wyss, a guide for female religious recluses, famously forbids the anchoresses from owning any animal except a cat. The cat was allowed because it was seen as a quiet, self-sufficient companion, a small, warm presence in a life of solitude. Yet, this simple act of providing shelter raises deep questions. Did allowing animals to sleep indoors significantly increase the transmission of diseases between species, silently shaping human and animal immune systems over centuries? How did the constant, reliable warmth of a human home alter the natural biological cycles of these animals, affecting their breeding patterns or hibernation instincts? And did the shared vulnerability of sleep, the quiet darkness of a medieval night, create a form of nonverbal communication and bonding between humans and pets that we can no longer understand? Number 19 was training a tool or a conversation. Training is often seen as an act of dominance, bending an animal's will to our own. But in the medieval context, it was often a deep, nuanced conversation between human and animal. It required immense patience, observation, and a profound understanding of the animal's nature. This was most evident in the two most prestigious animal partnerships of the era, falconry and the hunt. A well-trained hawk or hound was not a mindless puppet. It was a highly skilled partner whose instincts were honed, not broken. The art of falconry, in particular, was a testament to this relationship. A book like the Arte Venandi cum Avibus, The Art of Hunting with Birds, written by the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II in the 1240s, is a masterpiece of ornithological observation and training psychology. Frederick II was a keen scientist. He did not rely on superstition. He spent years observing birds in the wild. His methods were based on positive reinforcement, using food to reward desired behaviors. He understood that a hawk could not be forced. It had to be persuaded. The bond between a falconer and his bird was one of intense, silent communication. The falconer had to learn to read the slightest shifts in the bird's posture, the look in its eye. The hawk, in turn, learned to trust the human completely, returning to the glove from high in the sky. This was not domination. This was a partnership built on mutual respect. The same was true for hunting dogs. Gaston Phoebus did not advocate beating his hounds into submission. His Livre de la Chasse details a training regimen that begins when the dogs are puppies. It is based on routine, encouragement, and clear commands. He speaks of talking to his dogs, of praising them, of knowing each one's personality. He understood that a dog that hunts out of fear is not as effective as a dog that hunts out of a joyful desire to work with its master. This conversation extended beyond the hunt. A well-trained dog was a dog that could live harmoniously within the household, respecting boundaries and responding to its human family. But what have we lost in our understanding of this conversation? Did medieval trainers possess a sensitivity to animal body language and vocalization that our modern noisy world has deafened us to? Were they, without the tools of modern science, intuitively practicing a form of interspecies communication that we are only now beginning to rediscover through behavioral studies? And in a world without clickers and a mountain of theory, was the simple, direct connection between a person and their animal a more powerful training tool than anything we have developed since? Number 18, did they medicate out of duty or devotion? When a modern pet gets sick, we rush it to the vet. It is a simple act of love and responsibility. But what about in a time before veterinary science? Was a sick animal simply left to its fate? The evidence suggests otherwise. Medieval people went to great lengths to care for their sick and injured animals. This care was born from a mixture of practical need and genuine affection. A lame horse or a sick hawk was a loss of a valuable asset, yes. But the detailed remedies and treatments that survive show a level of concern that goes beyond mere economics. Much of medieval veterinary knowledge was compiled in texts known as leech books. These were collections of remedies for both humans and animals, often blurring the lines between the two. The Leech Book of Bald, a 10th century Old English medical text, contains treatments for horses and other livestock. These were not just superstitions, they were a form of herbal medicine based on centuries of observation. Remedies might include poultices of herbs like comfrey to help mend broken bones, or potions made from plants like wormwood to expel parasites. The act of gathering these herbs, preparing the poultice, and gently applying it to an injured animal was an intimate act of care. The care for high-status animals was even more sophisticated. Treatises on horsemanship, like the Book of St. Albans, published in 1486, included extensive sections on equine medicine. They detailed surgical procedures like bloodletting or firing, and complex recipes for healing ointments. For valuable hawks, falconers would meticulously imp a broken feather. This delicate procedure involved grafting part of a new feather onto the stump of the broken one, restoring the bird's ability to fly. This was a form of microsurgery requiring a steady hand and immense patience. It was not something you did for an animal you did not care about. This medical care reveals a belief that animals were worthy of healing. It was an acknowledgement of their suffering. When a noblewoman sat up at night nursing a sick lapdog with a warm broth, she was not calculating its value. She was responding to the distress of a creature she loved. She was acting out of devotion. The questions that remain are profound. How many of these herbal remedies, dismissed for centuries as folk magic, actually contained medically active compounds that we are only now validating with modern science? Did the constant close contact required to administer these treatments, the touching and soothing, have a placebo effect on the animals, accelerating healing through a reduction of stress? And could the shared medical landscape, where humans and animals were often treated with the same herbs from the same garden, reveal a deeper, almost spiritual belief in a shared biology of suffering and healing? Number 17, was a portrait a mark of status or a declaration of love? In the age before photography, a portrait was an expensive, time-consuming luxury. To be painted was to be immortalized. It was a statement that you, your family, and your possessions were important enough to be recorded for posterity. And in the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance, something remarkable began to happen in these portraits. Pets started to appear not as symbols in the background, but as cherished individuals held in the arms or sitting at the feet of their owners. This was a radical shift. It was a visual declaration of an emotional bond. Look at the famous Arnolfini portrait by Jan van Eyck, painted in 1434. In the foreground, between the wealthy merchant and his wife, stands a small dog, a Griffon Terrier. And art historians have debated its symbolic meaning for centuries. Does it represent fidelity, lust, wealth? But perhaps the simplest explanation is the most powerful. Perhaps they just loved their dog and wanted it in their family portrait. The dog looks directly at the viewer, confident and included. It is not a prop. It is a member of the household. This trend continued in countless portraits of noble women from the 15th and 16th centuries. We see them cradling small lapdogs. These are not hunting hounds or working animals. They are companions, their sole purpose to give and receive affection. The Portrait of a Lady with a Squirrel and a Starling by Hans Holbein the Younger from around 1526 is another fascinating example. The squirrel, a common but delicate pet, is collared and leashed, sitting calmly on the woman's arm. Its presence speaks to a quiet domestic world of patient care. Commissioning a master like Holbein to painstakingly render your pet squirrel was an extraordinary act of affection. These portraits are invaluable windows into the past. They show us what manuscripts cannot. They show us the physical intimacy between people and their pets, the way a hand rests on a dog's back, the way a woman's gaze softens as she looks at the small creature in her lap. This was not just about showing off a prized possession, like a jewel or a fine dress could do that. Including a pet in a portrait was a public statement. It said, "This creature is part of my life. Its companionship brings me joy. It belongs in the story of who I am." It was a declaration of love, painted in oil and preserved for all time. But what do these silent images still hide from us? When an artist painted a pet, were they instructed to capture a specific personality, a favorite quirk, known only to the owner? Did the very act of having to sit still for hours with their pet for a portrait session forge a new, deeper level of quiet understanding between them? And how many portraits of less wealthy people with their beloved, but now forgotten pets were painted on cheap wood or cloth, and have since crumbled to dust, taking their stories of love with them? Number 16 was a fancy collar, a chain, or a crown. A collar is a symbol of ownership, a sign of control. But in the Middle Ages, a collar could be so much more. For many pets, it was a piece of jewelry, a mark of honor, a tangible expression of their owner's affection and pride. The materials and craftsmanship that went into some medieval pet collars are staggering. They transform a simple tool of restraint into a work of art, elevating the animal from a mere possession to a treasured companion. The simplest collars were leather, functional, and durable, often with a simple buckle. But for the pets of the aristocracy, simple would not do. We have evidence from art, literature, and archaeology of collars made from velvet, silk, and even precious metals. They were often adorned with bells, studs, and family crests. The Luttrell Psalter, an English illuminated manuscript from the 1330s, shows a small dog wearing a bright red collar studded with what appear to be silver bosses. It is a small detail, but it speaks volumes about the dog's status within the household. It is being decorated, beautified, just as a human member of the family might be. In the 15th century, Tres Riches Joyas du Duc de Berry, one of the most famous illuminated manuscripts in the world, the calendar pages depicting the lives of the nobility are filled with dogs. And these dogs are wearing exquisite collars. In the January scene, we see fine greyhounds with wide blue collars decorated with golden fleurs de lis, the symbol of French royalty. These are not just collars, they are royal livery. They proclaim that these dogs belong to the Duke. They are part of his court, his entourage. They are a living, breathing extension of his own magnificence. Archaeological finds confirm this. In the 1960s, a 9th century Viking grave in Sweden was found to contain the skeleton of a cat alongside its owner. The cat was wearing a beautiful, intricate bronze collar. This was not a working cat. This was a beloved pet, honored enough to be buried with its master, and adorned in death as it had been in life. The collar was not a chain, it was a crown. It was a sign that this animal was special, cherished, and worthy of being decorated with beautiful things, just like a person. The questions these objects raise are tantalizing. Was there a specific craft of pet collar making, with artisans who specialized in these miniature works of art? Did the jingle of a specific set of bells on a collar create a unique soundscape within a castle, allowing people to track their pets by ear and associate that sound with comfort and companionship? And could the weight and feel of a heavy, decorated collar have given an animal a sense of its own importance, changing its posture and its interactions with other animals? Number 15, did they grieve as we grieve? Grief is the price we pay for love. The pain of losing a pet is a profound and universal experience. But was it an emotion that medieval people, so often faced with human death, would have understood or allowed themselves to feel for an animal? The answer, unequivocally, is yes. The evidence of their grief is written in poems, carved in stone, and buried in the earth. They mourned their animal companions with a depth and sincerity that is instantly recognizable to any modern pet owner. Perhaps the most famous example is the story of the Welsh prince Llewellyn the Great and his faithful hound, Gêlert. The legend, recorded in the 18th century but with much older roots, tells of Llewellyn returning home to find his baby's cradle overturned and Gêlert's mouth covered in blood. Believing the dog had killed his heir, he drew his sword and killed Gêlert. Only then did he hear the cries of his baby safe under the cradle next to the body of a wolf that Gêlert had killed to protect the child. Llewellyn, racked with guilt and sorrow, is said to have buried the dog with great ceremony and never smiled again. The village of Bedgelert in Wales, meaning Gêlert's grave, is a monument to this story of love, loss, and profound regret. This is not just folklore. Real historical figures express their sorrow. The 12th century Byzantine princess Anna Komnene wrote a moving tribute to her pet dog, a tiny Melitaean, a breed similar to a Maltese. She described its beauty and intelligence and her deep sadness at its death. A more anonymous but equally poignant piece of evidence comes from a 1st century Roman tombstone found in Britain on the very edge of the medieval period for a dog named Margarita. The inscription carved by her owner reads like a modern eulogy. I was Margarita, a Gaul by breed, not uncomely. I used to go on my master's and mistress's arms or lie on their lap. I did not bark for no reason, but now I am quiet, overcome by death, and lie under this small piece of marble. Even burial practices show this grief. While formal pet cemeteries were not common, individual, careful burials have been found. The cat with the bronze collar in the Viking grave is one example. At the medieval castle of Excuses in France, archaeologists found the carefully laid out skeletons of several dogs in the castle moat, buried in a way that suggested deliberate, respectful interment, not just disposal. They were laid to rest, not thrown away. This was the final act of care for a beloved companion. But how was this grief managed in a society with different emotional rules? Did people feel ashamed of crying for an animal when human mortality was so high, forcing them to mourn in private? Were there informal rituals, small personal ceremonies of remembrance, that have left no trace in the historical record? And is it possible that the intensity of their grief was even greater than ours, precisely because the emotional outlet for it was so much more restricted and less understood? Number 14. Did they write about them as characters or as family? How an animal is portrayed in literature tells you a lot about how a culture sees them. In medieval stories, poems, and chronicles, animals are not just part of the scenery. They are often characters in their own right. They have personalities, emotions, and form deep bonds with the human characters. They are written about with an insight and affection that suggests the authors were drawing from their own personal experiences with beloved pets. They were writing them not just as animals, but as a family. Geoffrey Chaucer, the father of English literature, populates his Canterbury Tales from the late 14th century with memorable animals. The prioress, a figure of gentle sentimentality, is described as being so tender-hearted that she would weep if she saw a mouse caught in a trap. Her love is focused on her smale hounds, her little dogs. Chaucer tells us she fed them with roasted flesh, milk, and fine bread. And when one of them died or was struck with a stick, she was al conscience and tendre herte. Chaucer is gently mocking her excessive sentiment, but in doing so, he is acknowledging that such deep affection for pets was a recognizable trait in his society. In the world of chivalric romance, the bond between a knight and his horse or hound was a cornerstone of his identity. In the famous 14th century poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Gawain's horse, Gringolet, is his constant companion on his perilous journey. The horse is not just transportation, he is a source of comfort and a fellow traveler in a dangerous world. The poem describes the care Gawain takes in stabling and grooming Gringolet, a reflection of the knight's own virtue and his respect for his animal partner. Similarly, in the stories of Tristan and Isolde, Tristan's dog, Husdant, is a symbol of unwavering loyalty, able to recognize his master even when he is in disguise. Even in religious writing, we see this deep affection. The 14th century mystic Marjorie Kempe, in her autobiography, The Book of Marjorie Kempe, describes a moment where she sees a woman holding a small dog in her lap. The sight fills her with a vision of St. Anne and the infant Virgin Mary, a moment of profound spiritual insight triggered by a simple, everyday scene of a woman and her pet. For Marjorie, the love for the small animal, was a reflection of the divine love that permeated the universe. So what untold stories lie between the lines of these texts? Did authors use animal characters as a safe way to explore complex human emotions like grief and loyalty, which might have been too direct or sentimental to express otherwise? How many of the detailed descriptions of animal behavior were drawn from direct, loving observation of the author's own pet, sitting right there in the room as they wrote? And is it possible that these literary portrayals, by validating the emotional bond with pets, actually encourage people to be more loving and expressive with their own animals? Number 13 was a muse for a hawk, like a palace for a prince. For the medieval aristocracy, a hawk was not just a bird, it was a living jewel, a symbol of power, and a cherished partner in the noble sport of falconry. The amount of resources, time, and architectural planning dedicated to housing these birds is a stunning testament to their value. A mews, the building where hawks were kept, was not a simple cage. It was often a carefully designed, specialized structure built to ensure the health, comfort, and safety of its precious occupants. It was, in its own way, a palace for a prince of the air. The design of a mews was a science. As detailed in texts like Frederick II's The Arte Venandi cum Avibus, every element was considered. The building needed to be dry and airy, but not drafty, to prevent respiratory illnesses. The purchase had to be the right texture and thickness for the bird's feet. There were often different sections for different types of hawks and separate areas for birds that were molting or sick. The Royal Mews at Charing Cross in London, established in the 14th century, was a vast and complex institution housing the king's collection of valuable hawks. The very word, mews, comes from the practice of keeping the hawks in these buildings while they were mewing or molting, a delicate time when they needed special care. The daily routine in the mews was one of meticulous care. The birds were kept on leashes, their perches were kept scrupulously clean, and they were fed a specific diet of high-quality meat. Falconers, who were highly respected and well-paid professionals, would spend hours with their birds, tending to their needs and strengthening their bond. This was not just about husbandry, it was about a relationship. The health and happiness of the hawk were paramount because a stressed or unhealthy bird would not fly well. This level of care extended beyond hawks. Special buildings were constructed for other valued animals. The dovecotes were built to house pigeons, and large kennels, like the one described by Gaston Phoebus, were built for hunting hounds. The very act of constructing a separate, dedicated building for an animal was a powerful statement. It acknowledged that the animal had specific needs that were different from humans. It recognized them as a distinct and important part of the estate's life. It was an investment of capital, labor, and thought that went far beyond basic shelter. It was architectural love. But what don't these silent structures tell us? Did the specific design of a mews, with its controlled light and airflow, have a psychological effect on the hawks, making them more receptive to training? Was there a secret language of architecture, with certain designs being known among falconers to produce calmer or more aggressive birds? And how did the constant presence of these animal palaces on the landscape shape the way ordinary people viewed the status and importance of the animals that lived inside them? Number 12, did they choose breeds for work or for friendship? Today we choose a dog breed based on temperament, size, and whether it's good with children. We think of this careful selection as a modern phenomenon, but medieval people were also sophisticated breeders and selectors of animals. They understood that different breeds had different skills and personalities. While many of these choices were driven by practical needs, a greyhound for speed, a mastiff for guarding, there is ample evidence that they also selected and kept animals purely for the pleasure of their companionship. The concept of the lapdog is not a modern invention. The medieval world had a wide variety of dog breeds, many of which are ancestors of our modern breeds. They had hounds for tracking by scent, like bloodhounds, hounds for tracking by sight, like greyhounds, and terriers for chasing vermin out of their burrows. But alongside these working dogs, they had a category of small dogs known simply as lap dogs or sleeve dogs, small enough to be carried in the sleeve of a gown. These dogs had one job: to be companions. Caius, a 16th century physician, wrote one of the first English treatises on dogs, De Canibus Britannicus. He describes a type of small dog, the spaniel gentle, or comforter, which was a favorite of noble ladies. He writes that their purpose was to be played and dangled with, and that women would carry them in their bosoms to absorb their own infirmities. While this medical belief might be strange to us, the emotional truth is clear. These were creatures of comfort and intimacy. Their small size, soft fur, and affectionate nature were their most prized qualities. They were bred for friendship. This selection for companionship was not limited to dogs. Certain breeds of cats were likely prized for their docile and affectionate natures, making them suitable companions for a solitary anchoress. Even horses were distinguished by type. A knight needed a powerful warhorse, a destrier. But for travel, a lord or lady would want a palfrey, a horse chosen for its smooth gait and calm temperament. The choice was not just about function, it was about the quality of the experience. It was about choosing an animal that would be a pleasant and agreeable partner on a long journey. This deliberate selection shows a sophisticated understanding of animal genetics and personality. It shows that medieval people were not just taking whatever animal was available. They were actively shaping the animal world around them to suit their needs, including their emotional needs. They were breeding for love, but this raises some fascinating questions. How much of what we consider a breed's innate temperament was actually established by these early, undocumented breeding choices made in medieval castles and manors? Did they engage in a form of early personality testing, selecting puppies from a litter based on which one was the boldest or the most gentle? And is it possible that in breeding animals for companionship, they were also unconsciously breeding traits in themselves, patience, gentleness, empathy, that were necessary to care for these smaller, more dependent creatures? Or number 11 was grooming about hygiene or intimacy. Grooming an animal is a necessary chore. It keeps them clean and healthy, but it can also be a deeply intimate act. The physical contact, the gentle brushing, the quiet moments of shared calm, it is a powerful form of non-verbal communication and bonding. In the medieval period, the grooming of valued animals was a carefully prescribed ritual. It was about hygiene, yes, but it was also about building trust and expressing affection. For horses, grooming was a cornerstone of good horsemanship. Manuals on equine care stressed the importance of daily currying and brushing. This removed dirt and sweat, which could cause skin diseases, but it also stimulated the muscles and allowed the groom to check for any injuries or soreness. The bond between a knight and his warhorse was legendary, and it was a bond built not just in the heat of battle, but in the quiet, repetitive, and gentle moments of daily grooming. It was a time for the horse to learn the feel of its master's hand, and for the master to learn the contours and condition of his horse. The same level of care was lavished on hunting dogs. Gaston Phoebus recommended that his hounds be brushed and their paws checked and cleaned after every hunt. He even suggested rubbing them down with straw to dry them and keep them warm. This was not something a lord would do himself, but he would employ trusted servants to do it. The quality of this care was a reflection of the lord's own character. A well-groomed pack of hounds was a sign of a well-run and caring estate. Even smaller pets received this attention. We can infer from portraits showing dogs with clean, well-kept coats that grooming was a part of their lives. For a cat, whose self-grooming is a hallmark of its species, the act of a human brushing them would be a pure act of social bonding, mimicking the allogrooming that cats do to each other to reinforce social ties. The anchoress, with her single cat, in her quiet cell, would have found comfort in the simple, repetitive motion of stroking or brushing her companion, the resonant reward for her gentle care. This physical intimacy, through grooming, was a language of love. It communicated care, attention, and safety. It was a way of saying, I will look after you, without using a single word. It strengthened the bond between species, creating a partnership built on gentle physical trust. But what did this close physical contact truly mean? Did the act of grooming, of touching and handling an animal so regularly, have a measurable physiological effect on the human, lowering their heart rate and reducing stress in a world full of it? How much knowledge of animal anatomy and health was gained and passed down verbally by the grooms and servants who spent their lives touching and tending to these animals? And could the specific rhythms and pressures of grooming have been a form of animal massage, providing therapeutic benefits that medieval people understood intuitively but could not explain scientifically? Number 10, did they build a world for their pets? We think of pet-proofing our homes or building a catio as modern ideas, but medieval people also altered their environment and created specialized equipment to accommodate the needs of their animal companions. They did not just bring animals into their world, they built a world for them, filled with objects and structures designed specifically for their comfort, safety, and function. This was a tangible, physical expression of their commitment to the animal's well-being. Take the simple cat hole. In medieval manuscripts and woodcuts, we sometimes see small, arched holes cut into the bottom of doors. The most famous example is a door from the 15th century at Exeter Cathedral in England, which has a cat hole that records show was cut to allow the resident mouser to come and go as it pleased. The cathedral even paid the cat a salary for its mousing duties. This small architectural modification is a profound statement. It acknowledges the cat's autonomy, its need to move freely. Instead of forcing the cat to wait for a human to open the door, the humans change their own structure to fit the cat's life. For horses, the amount of specialized equipment was immense. Saddles were not one size fits all. A great deal of knowledge went into designing saddles that fit the horse's back properly to prevent sores and distribute the rider's weight evenly. There were different saddles for different purposes: war saddles, travel saddles for ladies, and pack saddles. The development of the rigid stirrup around the 8th century was a revolution, not just for the rider's stability, but for the horse's comfort, allowing for better balance. Bridles, bits, and horseshoes were all part of a sophisticated technology designed to make the partnership between horse and human more effective and humane. Even for dogs, there was specialized gear. Hunting dogs might wear protective coats or barboats to guard against the tusks of a wild boar. And greyhounds, sensitive to the cold, were often given coats, a practice we see in illustrations from the period. This was not just dressing up a pet, it was a practical and loving act of care designed to protect the animal from harm and keep it comfortable while it performed its work. Building this world was an act of empathy. It required observing the animal, understanding its needs, and then expending the effort and resources to meet those needs. And it was a way of making their human-centric world a more welcoming and functional place for the other species they shared their lives with. The questions this raises are about the animal's perspective. Did a cat understand the purpose of a cat hole, or did it just seem like a magical feature of its territory? How did a well-fitting saddle and bridle change a horse's psychological experience of being ridden, perhaps transforming it from an ordeal into a comfortable partnership? And could the very existence of these animal-specific objects have taught medieval children, from a young age, that animals had their own needs and deserved their own place in the world? Number 9 was a pet, a bridge to the divine. In the deeply religious world of the Middle Ages, everything was seen through the lens of faith. The natural world was God's creation, and animals were a part of that divine tapestry. For some, the connection with an animal was more than just companionship. It could be a pathway to spiritual understanding, a tangible link to the innocence and beauty of God's work. A pet was not a distraction from God, but a reflection of Him. The stories of the saints are filled with examples of deep, loving bonds with animals. Saint Francis of Assisi, who lived in the early 13th century, is the most famous example, preaching to the birds and taming a wolf. But he was not alone. Saint Jerome was famously depicted with a lion from whose paw he had removed a thorn. The lion became his loyal companion in the desert. Saint Cuthbert was said to have had otters come and warm his feet after he stood praying in the cold sea. These stories or hagiographies were meant to show the saints' holiness. Their harmony with the animal kingdom was proof of their harmony with God's will. This idea filtered down to the lives of ordinary people. The Ancrian Wis, the guide for female recluses, allowed a cat because it was a creature of quiet contemplation, a small, purring reminder of the peacefulness of God's creation in a life devoted to prayer. The loyalty of a dog was often seen as a model for the loyalty a Christian should show to God. The innocence of a lamb was a direct symbol of Christ. Loving and caring for one of these creatures was a way of participating in this divine symbolism. It was a spiritual exercise. This view is beautifully captured in the medieval bestiaries. These were lavishly illustrated manuscripts that described various animals, both real and imaginary. For each animal, there was a moral or religious lesson. The lion, which was believed to sleep with its eyes open, was a symbol of Christ's vigilance. The pelican, thought to pierce its own breast to feed its young with its blood, was a symbol of the Eucharist. By observing the animals around them, and by caring for their own domestic pets, medieval people could see these spiritual truths played out in their daily lives. A dog's unconditional love was a small, daily taste of God's unconditional love. But what spiritual mysteries have we lost? Did some people believe that the soul of a beloved pet could achieve a form of salvation, or did they have to reconcile their love with the doctrine that animals had no souls? Could the quiet, non-judgmental presence of a pet in a prayer chamber or cell have acted as a form of meditation, helping people to achieve a deeper state of religious contemplation. And is it possible that for some, the love they felt for their pet was the most pure and uncomplicated form of love they ever experienced, making it the closest they ever came to touching the face of God? Number 8, were they protected by law or just by love? A society's laws reflect its values. While medieval laws were primarily concerned with people and property, animals were not entirely absent. The legal status of animals was complex. They were, for the most part, considered property. But there are fascinating glimpses in the legal codes and court records of a more nuanced view, one that offered animals a degree of protection that went beyond their simple monetary value. This protection was sometimes codified in law, but was more often enforced by a shared social understanding of what was acceptable treatment. In many early medieval legal systems, like the Welsh laws of Hywel Dda from the 10th century, there were specific fines for killing or injuring someone else's animal. These laws were incredibly detailed. They set out the value of different animals at different stages of their lives. Well, a cat, for example, was valued for its ability to mouse. The laws specified the fine for killing a cat that guarded a barn. The killer had to pay enough grain to cover the cat's body when it was held up by its tail with its nose touching the ground. This is a practical agricultural value, but the very existence of such a specific law shows that the cat's life was not worthless. It was valued and protected by the community. Some laws even seem to acknowledge the animal's perspective. In some parts of Europe, there were animal trials. While these can seem absurd to us, a pig being tried for murder, or a swarm of locusts being excommunicated, they spring from a worldview that saw animals as having a degree of moral agency. If an animal could be held responsible for its actions, then it was not just an unthinking object. It was a being that was part of the same moral and legal universe as humans, even if it was on a lower rung. Beyond formal law, there was the unwritten law of custom and community. A person known to be cruel to their animals would have been viewed with suspicion by their neighbors. Cruelty was seen as a character flaw, a sign of a disordered and unchristian soul. The protection an animal received often came not from a judge, but from the simple, loving oversight of its owner and the community around them. An owner would defend their pet from harm, not just because it was their property, but because they had an emotional bond with it. That bond was the animal's best legal defense. So what are the unanswered legal questions? How often did disputes over the mistreatment of a pet end up in local manorial courts? And what do those unexamined records tell us about everyday attitudes? Was there a concept of animal cruelty as a distinct crime, or was it always prosecuted simply as damage to property? And when an animal was put on trial, did anyone ever stand up to act as its defense attorney, arguing for its life not out of legal necessity, but out of a sense of justice and compassion for a fellow creature? Number 7, did they travel the world together? Travel in the Middle Ages was difficult and dangerous. Journeys that take us hours would have taken them weeks or months. It was not something undertaken lightly, and yet people often took their pets with them. A dog, a cat, or even a hawk was a common sight in a traveling party. This was not always for practical reasons. Often it was because the owner could not bear to leave their companion behind. The shared hardships of the road forged an even deeper bond between human and animal. As knights on military campaigns or on pilgrimage would be accompanied by their hounds and their hawks. These animals were partners in their life of action, and it was natural to take them along. But even people on less martial journeys traveled with their pets. Merchants on long trade routes might have a dog for protection and companionship. Scholars traveling between universities might have a cat to keep the rats away from their precious books in unfamiliar inns. The famous 12th century scholar Petrarch wrote lovingly of his dog, who was his constant companion on his many travels. The challenges of traveling with an animal were immense. You had to ensure it had food and water, which could be scarce. You had to protect it from the dangers of the road, from bandits to wild animals. For a noble lady traveling with her small lapdog, a servant might be specifically tasked with carrying and caring for the tiny creature. The decision to take a pet on a journey was a decision to take on a significant extra burden. It was a choice that could only have been motivated by a deep emotional attachment. This companionship on the road provided immense comfort. In a strange town or a foreign land, the familiar, warm presence of a pet was a link to home. It was a non-judgmental friend in a world that could be hostile and unforgiving. The animals shared the same sights, the same cold nights, the same meager meals. This shared experience, this quiet solidarity, created a bond that was uniquely powerful. The pet was not just a passenger, it was a fellow pilgrim, a co-adventurer on the journey of life. But what was the animal's experience of this travel? How did a dog's incredible sense of smell process the constantly changing landscape of a long journey, creating a scent map of the world that we cannot even imagine? Did the stress of travel affect animals' health? And did medieval people develop specific remedies for a travel-sick pet? And when they finally arrived at their destination, did the shared memory of the journey, the unique sights and sounds and smells, create a form of silent, shared nostalgia between the human and their animal companion? Number 6, were they just playthings or were they playmates? Play is not a frivolous activity. It is essential for learning, for social bonding, and for mental health. The idea of playing with a pet, of engaging in a moment of pure, purposeless fun, seems very modern. But the instinct to play is timeless for both humans and animals. Medieval people played with their pets. This was not just about exercise, it was about shared joy, a moment of connection that transcended the barriers of species. They were not just playthings, they were playmates. We see glimpses of this play in medieval art. An illuminated manuscript might show a cat chasing a string or a small dog tumbling with a child on the floor. In the margins of serious religious texts, monks would sometimes doodle whimsical scenes of animals engaged in human activities, a testament to the playful spirit that even the most solemn environments could not extinguish. These images are often informal and full of life, capturing a moment of spontaneous fun. A famous marginalia from the 14th century shows a rabbit gleefully riding a snail into battle against a dog, a surreal and playful fantasy. Literary descriptions also speak of play. Gaston Phoebus, for all his serious advice on hunting, describes the joy of watching his puppies play in the sunny yard he designed for them. He understood that play was essential for their development. The Ménagier de Paris advises his young wife to play with her dogs to keep them happy and attached to her. Play was seen as a key component of building a good relationship. It was a way of communicating in the universal language of fun. The toys they used were often simple. A ball made of rags, a stick, a dried pig's bladder, inflated and tied off. But the simplicity of the toy did not matter. What mattered was the interaction. The act of throwing a ball and having a dog joyfully retrieve it is a game that has been played for centuries. It is a perfect loop of shared intention and reward. For a cat, dangling a feather on a string creates a shared focus, a mock hunt that is thrilling for both the cat and the human watching it. This shared play was a recognition of the animal's inner life. It was an acknowledgement that they too had a need for joy, for exercise, for mental stimulation. It was a moment when the hierarchy of master and pet could be temporarily forgotten. In the middle of a game of fetch, the human and the dog are not master and servant. They are two friends, equals in a joyful conspiracy, but what did this play truly signify? Did different games teach animals important skills for their working lives, essentially making play an informal part of their training? How did the laughter and physical contact of play affect the brain chemistry of both the human and the animal, releasing hormones like oxytocin that strengthen their bond? And is it possible that in playing with their pets, medieval people were able to access a childlike part of themselves, of freedom and spontaneity that their rigid social roles often denied them? Number 5, did they talk to them and did they listen? We talk to our pets all the time. We ask them questions, we tell them our secrets, we narrate our day to them. We know they do not understand the words, but we feel, somehow, that they understand the meaning. This one-sided conversation is a fundamental part of the human-pet bond, and it is not new. Medieval people talked to their animals. They spoke to them with words of command, words of praise, and words of simple, everyday affection. In training manuals, the use of the voice is paramount. Gaston Phoebus tells his trainers to speak to the hounds, to encourage them with a cheerful voice. A knight would have specific words of encouragement for his horse before a joust. And a falconer would use soft, cooing sounds to calm his hawk. They understood that the tone, pitch, and emotion in their voice was a powerful tool for communication. The animals were listening and they were responding, but it went far beyond commands. People spoke to their pets as companions. The 15th century priest Richard Methley wrote in his personal spiritual notes about his conversations with his cat, Mita. He saw her as a fellow creature in God's world and addressed her as such. When a person lived a solitary life, like an anchoress or a shepherd, Their animal companion might be the only living being they spoke to for days on end. The animal was a silent confidante, a non-judgmental audience for their hopes, their fears, and their prayers. This vocal communication was a two-way street. Medieval people were also expert listeners. In a world without modern veterinary diagnostics, a horse's owner had to listen carefully to its breathing, to the sound of its footfalls, to detect the first signs of illness or lameness. A hunter had to learn to distinguish the different barks and bays of his hounds to understand what was happening in the hunt far out of his sight. They were attuned to the subtle vocalizations of their animals. A cat's purr, a dog's whine, a horse's nicker. These were not just noises. They were messages, this constant stream of sound. The human voice and the animal's response created the unique acoustic environment of a medieval household. It was a world of interspecies conversation. It was a declaration that the animal was not a piece of furniture, but a sentient being worthy of being spoken to and worthy of being listened to. The unanswered questions are about the nature of this listening. Were medieval people, living in a quieter world, able to hear a wider range of animal vocalizations and interpret them more accurately than we can today? Did the act of constantly talking to an animal, even without verbal response, create a feedback loop in the human brain that enhanced empathy and emotional intelligence? And could a detailed analysis of the commands in terms of endearment used for animals buried in old texts reveal a lost dictionary of this interspecies language? Number 4 was a place in the bedroom, the ultimate sign of trust. The bedroom is our most private space. It is where we are most vulnerable. To allow an animal into that space, to let it sleep in the same room or even on the same bed, is the ultimate expression of trust and intimacy. In the Middle Ages, despite concerns about hygiene and fleas, many people shared their sleeping quarters with their beloved pets. This co-sleeping was a powerful symbol of the animal's status as a full-fledged member of the family. We see this intimacy depicted in art and described in literature. Tomb effigies of medieval knights and ladies often feature a small dog resting at their feet. While this can have symbolic meaning, representing loyalty, it is also a realistic depiction of a common sleeping arrangement. The dog, a faithful companion in life, is shown as a faithful companion even in the eternal sleep of death. In the Arnolfini portrait, the little dog stands right in the center of the bedchamber, a clear sign of its place in the most intimate heart of the home. The reasons for this were both practical and emotional. A dog in the room provided a measure of security, a living alarm system against intruders. Its warm body could be a welcome comfort on a cold night, a kind of living hot water bottle. But beyond the practical, there was the profound emotional comfort of having a trusted companion nearby during the long, dark hours of the night. The sound of its quiet breathing, the feel of its weight at the foot of the bed, were reassurances against loneliness and fear. For women in particular, a small lapdog could be a constant companion in their private chambers or solar. The dog was a creature they could lavish affection on, a recipient of their care in a world where their own lives were often highly constrained. The dog was a friend who shared their most private moments, a silent keeper of their secrets. The 15th century Book of the Knight of the Tower warns ladies against loving their little dogs too much, suggesting they were spending more time pampering their pets than attending to their duties. This criticism is, in itself, proof of how deep these bonds were. This act of sharing the most private space in the house elevated the pet far beyond the status of a mere animal. It made them a confidante, a bedfellow, a cohabitant in the truest sense of the word. It was a nightly ritual of trust and affection, an unspoken declaration that you are safe with me and I am safe with you. But what were the hidden consequences of this intimacy? How much did the shared sleeping space contribute to the transmission of diseases, creating a common microbial environment for humans and their pets? Did the sleep cycles of humans and their pets begin to synchronize over time, a biological expression of their social bond? And did the dreams of medieval people frequently feature their animal companions? And if so, how did they interpret the appearance of their beloved pet in the mysterious landscape of their own subconscious? Number 3, did they value their instincts as a form of wisdom? In our scientific age, we often dismiss instinct as a primitive, unthinking force. But in the medieval world, animal instincts were often viewed with a kind of awe. They were seen as a form of natural wisdom, a direct connection to the rhythms of the world that humans, with their complex thoughts and societies, had lost. To trust an animal's instincts, a hound's nose, a horse's sense of danger was not a sign of foolishness. It was a sign of wisdom. The entire enterprise of hunting with hounds was built on a profound respect for the dog's sense of smell. A human cannot see the scent of a deer that passed hours ago, but the hound can. The hunter had to learn to trust the dog completely, to let it lead him into the unknown. This was a partnership where the animal was the expert. Gaston Phoebus writes with admiration about the intelligence and tenacity of his hounds, praising their ability to solve the complex puzzle of a cold trail. This was not just a tool, this was a collaboration with another kind of intelligence. The same was true for horses. Experienced riders knew that a horse could often sense danger long before a human could. A horse might shy or refuse to cross a bridge that seemed perfectly safe, only for it to be discovered later that the bridge was structurally unsound. They could sense changes in the weather, becoming restless before a storm. This was not seen as supernatural. It was understood as a heightened form of awareness, an instinct for survival that a wise human would do well to heed. Even the humble cat's instincts were valued. Its desire to hunt was not just tolerated, it was encouraged. The cat was the guardian of the grain stores and the library, its innate predatory drive harnessed for the good of the human community. Its fastidious cleanliness was seen as a natural virtue. Its mysterious, independent nature was a subject of fascination. It was a creature that lived alongside humans but was never fully tamed, a small piece of the wild world dwelling by the hearth. Valuing these instincts was an act of humility. It was an admission that humans were not the masters of all knowledge. It acknowledged that animals possessed abilities and a kind of wisdom that we lacked. By working with these animals, by trusting their instincts, humans could extend their own limited senses and become more effective and more aware. It was a partnership that enriched the human, not just the animal. But what forms of this animal wisdom did they perceive that we now ignore? Did they believe that animals could predict future events, like a death in the family or a coming battle? And were there recorded instances of people heeding these warnings? How did they reconcile an animal's powerful, sometimes violent, instincts with the Christian ideal of peace and gentleness? And in our modern world, so full of data and technology, have we completely lost the ability to listen to and trust the subtle, instinctive wisdom that our animal companions still offer us every day? Number 2 was a gentle hand, a sign of a gentle soul. In a world that could be brutal and violent, the mark of a truly noble or virtuous person was often seen in how they treated the weak and defenseless. This included animals. The use of a gentle hand, of kindness over force, was not just an effective training method. It was a reflection of a person's inner character. A person who was gentle with their animals was believed to possess a gentle soul. Cruelty to animals was a sign of a base and vicious nature. This ideal is a constant theme in medieval literature and conduct manuals. A good knight was expected to be as gentle with his horse in the stable as he was fierce with his enemies on the battlefield. The Boke of St. Albans advises that a gentleman can be known by his horse, his hawk, and his hound, and how well he cares for them. Good care included not just proper feeding and housing, but a manner of handling that was patient and kind. Beating an animal out of anger was seen as a loss of control, a failing of the man, not the beast. We see this ideal in religious figures as well. The stories of the saints taming wild animals are not stories of domination. St. Francis did not beat the wolf of Gubbio into submission. He spoke to it gently and persuaded it to live in peace with the townspeople. This was a miracle of gentleness, not of strength. It showed that love and kindness were more powerful forces than violence, a core tenet of Christian teaching. This belief had practical applications. Experienced animal handlers knew that a gentle approach simply worked better. A horse trained with patience and reward would be more reliable and less likely to bolt in fear. A dog that was treated with affection would be more loyal and eager to please. Gaston Phoebus explicitly warns against losing one's temper with the hounds, knowing that it would only make them fearful and confused. This was a form of emotional intelligence, an understanding that the animal's state of mind was crucial to its performance and well-being. The gentle hand was a sign of a civilized person. It was a way of demonstrating mastery not over the animal, but over one's own base impulses. It was a quiet performance of virtue, a daily demonstration of the Christian ideal of mercy. In a society with a strict hierarchy, how a person treated those below them, including animals, was a true measure of their worth. But how widespread was this ideal of gentleness in reality? Was it primarily an aristocratic code, with common people being more pragmatic or harsh with their working animals? When a person was cruel to an animal, was the social disapproval strong enough to act as a real deterrent? And is it possible that the act of practicing gentleness with an animal of consciously choosing kindness over force actually helped to cultivate a more peaceful and compassionate character in the person themselves, making the world a slightly less brutal place, one small act of kindness at a time. Number one, was their love so different from ours? After looking at all this evidence, the names, the shared food, the warm beds, the medical care, the grief, the art, the laws, the simple daily acts of kindness, we are left with one fundamental question. Was their love for their pets really so different from ours? We live in a world of designer pet food, advanced veterinary medicine, and doggy daycare. Our expressions of love are filtered through the lens of modern consumer culture and scientific understanding. But are the underlying emotions any different? The medieval owner who commissioned a portrait with their favorite dog was doing the same thing as the modern owner who fills their phone with pictures of their cat. Both are saying, "This creature is important to me. I want to preserve its memory." The knight who spent a fortune on a velvet, bell-studded collar for his greyhound was expressing the same pride and affection as someone today who buys a stylish, personalized harness. The anchoress who shared her solitude and her secrets with her cat was fulfilling the same need for quiet companionship that millions of pet owners feel every single day. The language they used was different. They might have spoken of loyalty, virtue, and God's creation, where we speak of unconditional love, emotional support, and mental health benefits. But the core of the relationship remains the same. It is a bond that crosses the species barrier. It is a relationship built on mutual care, trust, and a form of communication that goes deeper than words. It is the simple, profound joy of sharing your life with another being. The context of their lives was harder, more precarious. Disease, famine, and violence were constant threats. In such a world, the steadfast, uncomplicated love of an animal might have been even more precious. A pet was a small, warm spark of life and affection in a world that could often be cold and dark. Their love was not a luxury. It may have been a necessity, a way of staying human in inhuman times. The truth is, the desire to connect with and care for another creature is not a modern invention. It seems to be a fundamental part of who we are as humans. The people of the Middle Ages, for all their differences, were not aliens. They were us. They worked, they fought, they prayed, they feared, and they loved. And a significant part of that love was reserved for the animals that shared their homes, their journeys, and their hearts. And so the final questions are the most personal. When we look into the eyes of our own pet, can we see the echo of 1,000 years of this same connection, a silent lineage of love stretching back through time? It is the emotional architecture of the human-animal bond, a constant, unchanging part of our nature, as fundamental as our need for food or shelter. And if their love across a chasm of a millennium is so recognizable to us, what does that say about the enduring, timeless, and essential power of this incredible, loving bond?